Feyd-Rautha has quite a few things in common with Paul Atreides, even though it looks like they couldn't be further apart. Not only are they cousins, but they are both the product of a meticulous breeding program orchestrated by the Bene Gesserit spanning thousands of years. Feyd is about 1 year older than Paul, and they both hold an immense genetic potential. Even the sisterhood saw them as equals when it came to the genetic program, emphasizing how important was Feyd-Rautha in producing the long-awaited Kwisatz Haderach. Both of them grew up to become ambitious young men with great fighting skills, but an individual's character and values are shaped not by genetic inheritance, but by the environment in which they are raised. In contrast to Paul, who grew up under the guidance of a devoted and loving father, Feyd-Rautha was brought up by his uncle, the tyrannical Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Immersed in a world filled with violence, manipulation, and brutality, he developed into a cunning but reckless young man, with ambitions to overthrow his uncle and become the Baron of Giedi Prime. Abulurd Harkonnen, favored by his father Baron Dimitri, inherited the leadership of House Harkonnen after his death. He gained control over Arrakis and managed the spice production on behalf of Padishah Emperor Elrod IX. Peaceful and kind-hearted, Abulurd was quite unlike his ambitious and ruthless Harkonnen relatives. His tenure on DUNE was disastrous, marked by a decline in spice production and a rise in chaos and corruption. Due to the lack of brutality required for this position, he was sent to planet Lankavale to serve as the planetary governor, overseeing the whale fur trade. His duties were transferred to his elder half-brother, the sadistic and opportunistic Vladimir Harkonnen, who also took Abulurd's first son Glossu under his wing on Arrakis. Following Vladimir's rise to power, Abulurd grew repulsed by his half-brother's ruthless tactics and decided to distance himself from the Harkonnen name. He appealed to the Landsraad for permission to take on the surname Rabban, which was his wife's maiden name. The Bene Gesserit sisterhood, seeking a son from Abulurd for their breeding program, but considering Glossu unsuitable, secretly gives fertility drugs to his wife, Emi Rabban, who was quite past her prime, resulting in her conceiving a boy shortly thereafter. Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen was born on Lankavale, a quite remote and inhospitable world. The planet's surface was mainly covered with water, but due to its frigid climate, the seas were filled with pack ice and icebergs. His mother Emi gave him the second name Rautha, in honor of his maternal grandfather, who was later killed by his older brother Glossu. Feyd embodied his father's aspiration for a son who could escape the disgrace tied to the notorious Harkonnen name. He was seen as a potential successor, hopefully growing up to be different than his older, ruthless brother. Because Vladimir Harkonnen is not interested in women and desires a more competent successor than the brutish Glossu, he orchestrated the abduction of the young Feyd-Rautha from Lankavale. The Baron decides to raise him on Giedi Prime, the ancestral planet of the Harkonnens, molding him into a successor of superior caliber. Filled with anger, Abulurd was driven to seek vengeance, and his opportunity arose when he discovered the Baron's secret stash of smuggled spice on Lankavale. He enacted his revenge by giving away the unlawfully obtained spice to the planet's populace. Furious by his father's actions, Glossu took matters into his own hands, killing him and earning himself the nickname the Beast Rabban. While he remained on Lankavale, ruling the planet as the rightful heir, Feyd-Rautha grew up on Giedi Prime, being adopted by the Baron as his rightful heir and being honored with the last name Harkonnen. By proclaiming him Na Baron, it becomes evident that Vladimir Harkonnen favors him greatly over his brother. From a young age, he developed an insatiable thirst for violence, but also a great deal of charisma and intelligence critical for the future ruler of one of the great houses of the Imperium. In the book, Feyd-Rautha is described as having a round face and gloomy eyes, dark hair, and a very lean and muscular body, a stark contrast to his uncle, who was extremely obese. While not reaching the same depths of repulsiveness or wickedness as his uncle, he was equally driven by a lust for power. Much like the Baron, Feyd-Rautha was convinced that instilling fear and demonstrating power is essential in maintaining control over people. On his 17th anniversary, he kills his 100th slave gladiator in a grand spectacle on Giedi Prime public arena to highlight his combat prowess. In Frank Herbert's Dune, he secretly arranged with Thufir Hawat for one of the slaves not to be weakened by drugs, ensuring a thrilling and intense fight that would captivate the audience. In Dune Part 2, they are forced to change this, making it look like the Baron has orchestrated the whole thing, demanding from his nephew a worthy display. The key distinction is that in the book, Feyd seeks to prove to his uncle that he is deserving of becoming his successor, whereas in the movie, it is the Baron who imposes this expectation on his nephew. From a cinematic standpoint, the overall changes are great, enhancing him as a more impactful villain. These changes portray Feyd-Rautha as a stronger fighter and shift his character from being cunning to appearing more ruthless and malevolent, particularly with the revelation that he murdered his mother. In the book, Feyd doesn't leave anything to chance, and if the slave gains the upper hand, a hidden trigger implanted in his mind will be activated by the Mentat, leading to his paralysis. It is also customary for him to cheat by using poison on his blade, thus increasing his chances of winning even more. Due to his arrogance, he gets into close combat with the slave who is stronger than him, prompting the Mentat to paralyze his opponent just for a second, giving him enough time to use his poisoned blade. The slave chooses to end his own life instead of allowing the Harkonnen to claim the kill, but what is surprising is what Feyd-Rautha does after this. It is a Harkonnen tradition to take your opponent's head, and even though he is frustrated for not getting a clean victory, Feyd deliberately chooses to break the tradition by granting his fallen opponent an honorable burial with his knife in his hand. This shows that he is not just a mindless villain, but has some principles of his own, shaped by the twisted environment he grew up in. The Baron is displeased by his actions, but the overwhelming approval of the crowd showcases his popularity among the people of Giedi Prime. It is always dangerous when an individual with a thirst for violence and lust for power is so popular among the masses. For someone raised as the heir of a powerful house, in an environment where honor and loyalty means nothing, it is no surprise that Feyd-Rautha grew up to become a narcissist who takes pleasure in receiving praises and admiration due to his good looks, combat skills, and status. He becomes quite good at manipulating women and often surrounds himself with slave women who give him undivided affection. The Sisterhood's plan was to orchestrate the union of a Harkonnen male and a female with House Atreides' genes. This had the main objective of producing the Kwisatz Haderach, but also lowering the tension between the two houses. Losing Paul Atreides as their main prospect on Arrakis, the Bene Gesserit feared that they could also lose the other prospect at some point. This would imperil millennia of genetic engineering efforts, prompting the Sisterhood to send Lady Margot Fenring on Giedi Prime to seduce Feyd-Rautha and preserve his genetic material by getting pregnant. Due to his highly dangerous and cruel nature, she had to use the voice on him, thus avoiding any violent reactions. At this point, House Harkonnen is extremely rich due to their control over the spice production on Arrakis, but the Baron's ambition goes further than that. He wants to marry his nephew Feyd-Rautha to the eldest daughter of Emperor Shaddam IV, Princess Irulan Carino. Such a union would grant the Harkonnens considerable influence over the throne. In an effort to increase Feyd's popularity, the plan was to appoint him as the ruler of Arrakis, following a phase of oppressive governance by his sibling Rabban. This strategic move aimed to portray him as the savior of the people and a suitable successor to the imperial seat. Despite being an intelligent individual, his burning desire for the Baron's title and authority, coupled with his restless impatience and lack of subtlety, rendered Feyd-Rautha susceptible to being manipulated by Thufir Hawat, a Mentat still loyal to House Atreides. He tried to kill his uncle on several occasions, including an attempt to use one of the Baron's slave boys to do it for him. The Baron ultimately died after the Battle of Arrakis, when his 2-year-old granddaughter Alia Atreides poisoned him with the Gom Jabbar. Confident in his single combat prowess, Feyd-Rautha challenges his cousin Paul Atreides by invoking the Conley, an ancient tradition where two houses resolve their dispute in a duel. Despite trying to cheat again by using poison in his favor, Paul eventually gains the upper hand, allowing him to deal the fatal blow. With Feyd-Rautha now dead, the tyrannical rule of House Harkonnen ended, with the population of Giedi Prime moving forward under a very strict supervision from the new imperial authority. The only thing left behind by Feyd was a little girl named Mary, who was raised by Margot and Count Finring.